We should be live. I have to double check this to make sure that everything's working, but we should be live. Let me check my phone. Yeah, can you check, Christabel? Okay, no, it works on mine. Let me check my phone. All right, you're in the shot. You gotta hide away here. All right. How is everybody doing? What's up, guys? It's Johnny Candito of Candito Training HQ. You are a part of the first live that I've ever done publicly on this channel. I got my Ethernet cable working. I got everything going. Hopefully my audio is loud enough. Let me make it a little louder. Testing. Hold on. Testing. Okay, I think that's good enough. Maybe just a little louder. Okay. So let me get to your guys' questions. I already saw that there were a handful. And we will get going. So let me get to your guys' questions. I already saw that there were a handful. Okay. Yeah, we got a good amount of questions. Okay, so before I begin, one thing that I do want to make clear is I'm not running any ads on this public stream, and I will not in the future. At all. So there's two main things that you can do to support these streams. First of all is join the Candito Forever program. Link is in the description. That is by far my main business, my main focus. And by joining that, that helps immensely to support what I do and really make this channel possible. And also there's form checks, Q&As that are dedicated just to that as well. So you'll be getting double the amount of content, basically. And actually, the 6-week program, the Candito 6-week program, will have an updated, 2024 to 2025, basically, version coming actually next weekend. So that will actually be my next public YouTube video as well, just explaining that, the intention, the changes behind it. It's been about a decade coming. Now, the second way to support this channel when it comes to streams, because this is actually something I'm planning on doing pretty often, is I enabled memberships on this channel. So at $4.99, then you get members only streams, or if I do members only chats, then only you guys would ask the questions and then it's still a public video. But right now I'm planning on, we'll see how things go. If I get at least 50 members at $4.99, next Saturday I would do a live stream just for members only, and then basically do a live stream every week, 3 being members only Saturdays, and then once a month public. So that would be just another way to get more content, more Candito in your life, and ultimately just make sure your questions are addressed. So then extending off of that, there's a $49.99 option. And that's just if you really want to support the channel, and I'll follow your YouTube, follow your Instagram and everything. And that is much appreciated if you do. But yeah, those are the main ways to support this. And with that being said, let's get it going. Okay, so our first, and I'll go in order here, as long as we got enough. Well, we got plenty now. Okay, thank you guys for, wow, I see 65 people in here. Hey, that's a lot. Okay, so the first question we have, and I want this to be a mix, by the way, of informative content. That's by far the first. But I will say on these lives, you can ask me something about life, or about if you have some dating situation where you just want me to yap about, just give my opinion. Hey, why not? So there's nothing that's off limits on these streams except for politics. And it's just because politics loses too many subscribers. It would just not be worth it. So, everything except politics. You could ask about faith, you could ask about meaning of life or whatever, or just my life or my opinions on things. But again, number one is going to be training. Just if you want to deviate a little bit, this is the format to do so. We're just chilling. Okay, that being said, the first one, and again, let me actually make sure to check and make sure that my audio's good. Yeah, I can crank that just a little bit more. Okay, so that being said, the first question is missing a day in your training block, best way to make up. So this definitely depends on the circumstance, but overall, the best way to make up for a missed training day is the first option would be to simply reduce a rest day the following week and still hit it. So let's say you're squatting, especially if you're squatting twice a week, you have 3 days of rest, 4 days of rest, alternating, or it's on your 3rd day and 4th day. So you have 2 days off, 3 days off. So simply just moving it up a day and accepting that you're going to have a little bit of a subpar day that next week typically is the best way to make up for it. The other options are combining days. I'm not a big fan of that typically because usually what happens is the type of person to miss a day is also the type of person who can't afford to combine a day. So you have to be very realistic with yourself. And then the second option, so either move that next week up a day and reduce rest and deal with the negative consequences of that in the short term. And then the second option is to simply just move everything back a day. And I would actually say that second option is more ideal, assuming that you don't have specific limitations. So second one is preferred, but I'd say only 20% of cases or less will really be able to do that because most people train on specific days of the week or have a specific meet day coming up. And then that first one is the most common one. You just take the hit. It's no big deal to just miss one day. Someone says, I was going to have a movie date night, but I'm going to force her to watch this instead. That's a fantastic decision. That's the key to a long, healthy, happy marriage. When pyramiding up to a 1-rep max, what percentage jumps do you recommend? Aiming for 265 bench. I'm thinking I should do 250 times 1 before attempting 265. Yeah, I would say that's about right. I would do that or actually less. So typically on bench, you can really have tighter jumps. Now this, again, I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record on some technical questions, is that it is very individualized, and that cannot be emphasized enough. It's very individualized. So some people do thrive off of gigantic jumps. So my friend Ashton Ruska is a great example. Even percentage-wise, he takes huge jumps. He could squat 595, then squat 695, and then squat 800 if he had to, somewhere like that. And some people simply can tolerate that, and they see that over the long term. So the big thing is you want to track your best max attempts relative to your training history and then start to see a pattern. But for now, I'd say 250 to 265 is perfectly fine. I would just, if anything, in the long run, maybe go 255, 265. Because there are definitely some people, especially at your strength level, that's typically right at the point where you may actually notice that you're stronger by taking those smaller jumps because you refine technique a little bit more. So again, I'm sorry that it's not an exact percentage, but that's just reality, is that it really is. I mean, if you could go 90, 95, 100. You could do that. It'd be fine. Okay, what do you prefer for vertical jump gains? Full depth squats or pin/box squats? Can I run your strength power program in season? So the answer to that is both. I mean, both is completely fine. There's really no reason to avoid doing movements where you're having a partial knee bend. So the big thing is when you're jumping, you want to do both. And in fact, there's actually a study on this that proved that a deep ass to grass squat combined with half squats actually had better performance than the alternative options, which is actually interesting. Like that's a real study exactly on this topic, basically. So there actually is some good research on this. And what you have to look at is you have to look at transfer in the range. So you don't want to overdo specificity and only do box squats, I would actually avoid box squats altogether. I would only do pin squats because a box tends to make you sit back too much, whereas a pin squat, you stay in your quads just like in a jump. I would actually do pin squats. I would consider doing jump squats loaded, and then box jumps, and then ass to grass squats. But yeah, as far as the strength power program in season, I would probably not do that if you're trying to compete as high level as possible in your sport, assuming that you are, let's say, a senior in high school or above. Now, if you're a freshman in high school or a sophomore in high school and you know that this year isn't the most important, and I don't mean that in a like putting it down type of way. I mean that, and you know your long-term goal is to be much better than this. Then you can do stuff like that because then the priority isn't to put all your eggs into one basket. But otherwise, I will say that, especially if at the end of the season, I wouldn't do it because you are getting to a point where optimized strength training does require that you're using your recovery assets. And optimized training for a sport does also require the same. So eventually you're going to reach a point where either you have to just think about this logically. If I made this program for someone with full recovery resources to still squat twice a week, well, if you're adding on to that, obviously then you're not going to be able to do that as ideally. Or else you would be someone who's able to squat 4 times a week if you weren't doing a sport. And most people actually don't thrive on 4 times a week squats. So that being said, like I said, if you're a sophomore or younger, I would do it. If you're a junior or older junior in high school or in college, then I would not make that decision. And I would just save it for the off season. And you could just make adjustments, just squat 1 time a week or squat 1 time a primary day, maybe a 2x6 instead of a 3x6. And then on the pause squat day or the explosive day, this would be the explosive program, then just reduce the load. So make some changes where you're still pushing the primary day hard in terms of just going heavy and high RPE. So I'd do 2x6 instead of 3x6, like I said. Reduction of volume is the best way to adjust for in season. And then on that secondary day, keep volume the same and then just reduce for intensity. Okay. So there are a lot of viewers in here, over 100 live viewers. That's awesome. Okay, how to get family members in the gym. This is a fantastic question. I think the best way to think about this when it comes to getting family members in the gym is you have to think in terms of personal relationships as opposed to numbers. And that is always the key, is you have to think in terms of narratives and in terms of, like I said, relationships, but in terms of enjoyment also. So what I can't recommend enough is the book Atomic Habits. If you have not read that, maybe some people have because it's a popular book. It's a very well-selling book. Basically, what it goes over is how to establish a new habit. And one of the keys, it's basically all classical conditioning. You want to pair a positive feedback with what you're doing and make sure that there's as little of a delay in gratification as possible. And it's funny because we always talk about the principle of delayed gratification being a good thing, and it is good if you can do that. But if you're someone who struggles in any one area, the best way is to actually avoid it. To say that every time you go to the gym with your mom, let's say you're trying to get your mom to go gym. First of all, offer to go with her. That's huge. Don't just tell her what to do. Go with them. Go with them on a certain set time, certain set date. But then also, when you go with them, always go out to do something with them as well. So let's say you go to the gym, but before that, you always walk the dog with them, or you walk the dog after. You pair it with something that they already enjoy doing. And that's in the book Atomic Habits. You can watch just a YouTube summarization of it. I really think it's the single best way to think about these things, is you have to make it worth it. And then the final point I will say is you really want them to do the minimum amount of work. So 3 days a week is a great place to start. I actually find that when you try to get a family member and two times a week or less, a lot of times it becomes so hard to establish the habit at that point that 3 times a week is actually easier. So 3 times a week, establish the habit, go with them, make it fun. Make it not fun for them in a corny way. Make it fun for them in a way where you're pairing it with something that they already like to do. So you're not trying to come up with goofy ways to make it fun. Okay, tips on getting started with coaching. That's a great question. By far my best tip when it comes to coaching is to simply immerse yourself in the world of being coached. And this is something that I actually regret with my own career and experience, is that if I could go back in time and just speed things up as much as possible, because I'm self-coached and I'm a little bit more on the creative side of things, I like to do things my own way. Because of that, I basically kind of operate a little bit in a bubble, and that has some really big upsides. That's definitely a big reason why my programs have been able to really be very unique. And I don't have one, it's not like I coach like RTS, or I coach like Sean Noriega, or I coach like Joey Flex. Like I coach like myself because I have these ideas that I've really developed over time. That being said, from a business perspective, what I would do if I were you is immerse yourself with the team. Hire a coach who's reputable, like Marcellus Williams is a great example. I would hire someone like Marcellus Williams if you can get on that team, or someone who Marcellus recommends, like a Petrie, guys like that. Be under them, and then you can start asking them questions day to day, or don't annoy them or anything, but then you can start to develop a good relationship with them, and you develop a good reputation for taking your own training dead seriously. And then that'll make it much easier to then start taking people on. And you also just see how they treat their clients. Because that's in the end of the day, the biggest thing is that once you see the standard, then it's much easier to apply that to someone else. Whereas if you're creating your own standard, like how quickly should I respond? How should I treat people? How should I joke? All these things. Then it's just a lot more difficult. So by far the best way to grow is to go under someone who's already where you're at. And luckily with powerlifting, it's actually pretty easy. Like it's one of the few industries where you actually really can. And that also applies, obviously to personal training. Okay, if you could pick one lift to gauge someone's strength, what would it be, assuming you knew nothing about that person beforehand? You already know, barbell squat. Hands down, barbell squat. There is no question about it. It is crystal clear to me that the barbell squat is the best way to know if someone is strong or is faking it. Yeah, I think there's no other lift. Because the deadlift, as much as I like deadlifting, especially now, the deadlift you can't tell as much as you can on an ass to grass squat, especially a high bar Olympic squat. Actually, that's my number one, specifically a high bar Olympic squat. Okay, someone says I sometimes do lat pull downs with shoulder rows. Okay. I didn't catch the question. What's the worst advice you've ever heard someone give to novice lifter? Oh, that's a fantastic one. Okay, so the worst advice I've ever heard was, I actually heard this by someone who I do respect, who I've actually worked with, funny enough. So he said about how some lifters change their tempo warming up at a meet, and they warm up slower, and then they can add like 110 pounds onto their lift when it comes to their first attempt, because they warm up really slow, and then they can pick up the speed by that first attempt. And I was like, what? Why? You do not want to do that. You do not want to change your technique on meet day on the first attempt. Like, no. Okay. Hi, Johnny. Do you recommend someone buy shoes for squats, flats, or is it just good to squat barefoot with just socks? I have a home gym. I saw Dennis Cornelius squat barefoot a lot of times. First of all, I do not recommend squatting with socks ever, because I think the risk of slipping is too great. And even if you have a surface that's not slick, the odds of your cotton on your actual, just on your socks to your skin, even if the surface is totally fine, the odds of the cotton just bunching up is too high. So never do it in just socks. Now, that being said, as far as barefoot, I don't recommend that either. I think it's just a unique thing about him. And this is always the biggest thing that I say, is that every time you see someone who's doing something that is intriguing, is you just ask yourself, how many people actually do that? How many people? So other than Dennis Cornelius, I really don't know of anybody who's a high level lifter who's doing that. So I would absolutely not do that. And I also think there's some reasons as far as lateral stability and arch support where shoes are going to help. So I believe Squat U has that, kind of, I know he's kind of gimmicky with the foot stuff, but I believe he actually has a flat shoe that's designed, to emulate all the nonsense that, he promotes some nonsense as far as, overemphasizing the feet in a, very fearful way. But anyways, my main point being is that I would at least get flat shoes, or just like skateboarding shoes, something to where even if it doesn't even have that great of arch support, you can still push laterally off the sides without spillover of your feet, which $20 Vans do a better job of than no shoes at all. Okay. Some weeks I'm able to work out 4 times a week and others 3 times a week. Am I able to alternate between version 2 and version 3 of the 8-week program? Could I do the same with your other programs? No. In that one, I would just do version 3. So the reason why I say that is because on the bench press, the secondary day, it is a little bit different. So on the bench press, one philosophy I have is if you're benching 3 times a week, a really good idea is to actually have close grip or feet up bench at twice a week and have one really low RP day and one slightly higher RP day. So that way you're really blasting that bench, primary variation. However, on the 3 times a week program, what I have is basically like a dumbbell bench type of accessory, and then that close grip bench accessory alternating rather than paired up together. So because of that, I would not alternate. And also one really big principle is when it comes to programming for powerlifting, you want to undershoot your needs when it comes to what you set out to do. So let's say you can sometimes go in the gym 5 days a week, but then you also, most of the time, 4 days a week, sometimes 6 days a week. In a case like that, it's clear, just plan for 4 days a week. Because if you plan with this alternating, scheme, the problem is that you need to have a minimum that you always hit all the time. And then on weeks where you have extra time, it's good to not be always on the edge. So the worst thing that you could do is always be on the edge of your availability, because then you're going to, not only are you going to fluctuate in terms of stimulus, but it's also just going to be chaotic. Because if you go to the gym 3 days a week and one day you actually have a 4th day available and you don't go, a lot of times that's actually where you get that momentum going mentally. Because then you're like, oh, I could have gone, but I didn't. Now I'm eager for next week. And then you crush those 3 days. So hands down, I just recommend running V3. Not even close. Okay, what would be the minimum effective dosage for decent gains in the deadlift? What are your thoughts on PAC's research with 1 heavy single and a couple triples for decent progress? I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that when it comes to the minimum. And I've seen that with real life examples. I will say that of people who I've coached for years, it's basically never true. So there is an issue of how many years did someone like that put into good training? Whereas if you're someone who's trained, let's say, 8 years, you're an intermediate lifter, but then you haven't had good training, then you have good training with a minimum effective dose, then you can make progress. So like, let's say you've never used RP in your life. Yeah, then you can make some gains off of low volume. But if you've already used RP, you've done everything really, really effectively, you've had a secondary day be pause deadlifts, primary day be comp deadlifts, and you've really had the scheme all figured out, very rarely does someone like that thrive off of minimum effective dose for even a medium term. Usually it just goes backwards. So I will say that. Life might get super busy and won't be able to train, if at all, maximum bang for your buck. Yeah, Rupesh, since you're on the Forever program, honestly, I would just run version 3. I mean, you're on the Forever program, I run version 3. And the biggest thing is that by running version 3, you would have that day where you're able to do RDLs. For someone like you, you really want one competition deadlift day and then one RDL type day, but still get 2 to 3 sets. Because one of the issues with research like that, with minimum effective dose, is a lot of times they look only at volume and not at intensity and time in the gym. Because you have to think about it this way, is how quick is 2 to 3 sets of RDLs versus one heavy single and triples on the competition lift. Those RDLs are going to be much quicker, even though the effective volume might actually be higher, especially if it's, let's say, a 3x8. You're going to get more of a meaningful hypertrophy stimulus than a single on deadlift in a 2x3, especially a 2x3 at like RP5. Whereas, the research can favor the latter in the short term. But even in the medium term, you're really going to want both. So you're really going to want, I would do version 3 of in my Forever program of the programs, 3 days a week. And if you have to, you could simply just reduce the competition deadlift by 1 to 2 sets if needed. So if it's a 4x4, just do a 3x4, and so on and so forth. You could probably even do a 2x4 on that back off work. And because on the Forever program, all the deadlifts actually are block periodization, even the 8-week program is actually block periodization for the deadlifts, even though it's not for the squats. So no matter what, that'll actually be pretty dang easy to be able to do. Just 2 to 3 sets on RDLs, and then 3x4 on competition deadlifts with that single prior. What days and times do you do your Q&As for that purchase subscription? Tend to always miss them. Okay, so my plan is for so are you talking about for the Forever program? So for the Forever program, lately I've actually been doing form checks disproportionately more than the Q&A. So that's why, if you haven't seen them in a while, that's why, because I've been focusing more on the form checks. The last one was a 5-hour form check, which took me quite a bit of time. So this coming week also, all the focus is going to be on the 6-week program. So this Saturday, the 6-week program being released is the main thing for the Forever program. So I actually haven't been doing live Q&As. I've had some recorded Q&As where you submit questions. And the reason for that is because my internet connection actually has not been as good as now. So we'll see on that. But most likely what I'll do is just have questions. That's what I've been doing, is anytime there's questions available or form checks available, I announce it and then you can submit. And then the video's up when I have all of that ready. But since the form checks have been, anywhere from 3 to 5 hours, it's been a little bit more like bi-weekly rather than every week. So this past month, I've actually had only form checks as opposed to Q&As. So yeah, as long as you stay mindful of that opening on the Q&As for the email, you'll see it. It'll probably be the very next thing I do will be a Q&A after the release of the 6-week program. So the 6-week program will be released 7 days from now, and then that release of it will also be in the Forever program as well as a public video. And then as I do that, I'll be accepting questions for the following week's Q&A. So 2 weeks from now, I'll have a Q&A. 1 week from now, the questions will be open. Hopefully that explains everything. Would you rather Skibbity or Riz? Easily Skibbity. Easily Skibbity. Skibbity always gets me every time. I think Riz, when it comes to Baby Gronk, ruined the Riz for me. I saw the Riz Baby Gronk, that title, that pairing, but Skibbity is usually paired with Ohio, and I'm from Ohio. So if you understand that logic, you get me. Thoughts on Big Lenny's passing? It's sad. Not only is it sad, what's funny is nobody knows this, is my brother actually paid a cameo of Big Lenny where he said my brother's entering his prime years, because my brother's 34. He was 34 at the time. Now he's 35. And Big Lenny basically wished him well. This was basically the last year of Big Lenny being alive. So my brother has a video of Big Lenny, saying you're entering your prime. So that was very sad. He actually, He actually watches Big Lenny. I actually haven't watched Big Lenny at all, to be honest. But I respect him. Any interest in training power cleans? Maybe a nice compromise for power, even while heavier, since jumping may be more taxing. I'm of the side that there are two camps when it comes to this, when it comes to training for explosiveness. I'm of the side where I'm not a huge fan of power cleans, because fundamentally you have to think, what's the limiting factor? And because the catch itself can become a limiting factor in the speed and the coordination of the movement, I'm a bigger fan of jump squats and of trap bar deadlift jumps. So if you go on a trap bar deadlift, you just jump 100%. And the reason why I like that too is because then you are able to put 100% of power without thinking about how you're going to catch. And that's going to translate very well into producing force. Obviously, you're literally using your fast twitch fibers as much as humanly possible, recruiting them. But then also you're reaching triple extension a little bit easier. Typically, novice type people who are novices to weightlifting, which would include myself, all of us pretty much. Typically, it's actually really hard to actually produce as much force as possible because you have other limiting factors. So I'm not against it. I know a lot of people will argue for it. If you want to, by all means. But I do think that there are better alternatives. I think simpler and easier to overload is superior. And I also think you could handle more load and jump literally higher off the ground with that trap bar combination. So I'll do that. How long have you been a Christian? I have been a Christian 2 years, as far as genuinely Christian. So I was born Catholic, baptized Catholic, and confirmed. And it was right after confirmation, I basically was an atheist, agnostic atheist. I would definitely be on the camp that I say that if you're agnostic, realistically you're an atheist, because you have to make a decision as to how you live your life. And ultimately, obviously, no one literally knows everything. So I think atheism is a fitting term for that. So I'd consider myself an atheist, a Sam Harris type atheist, until I would say for 4 years I believed in God. For 2 years I've been a Christian specifically, because the first argument that made me believe in God was Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways. That was the first argument. But it took me a long time from that point to then actually believe in Jesus Christ. And now I'm Catholic, by the way, which that also took a long time. So I've only been Catholic actually for like 8 months. What has been the biggest and strongest you've ever been? Well, definitely, the biggest is now. You asked that question like I'm 60 years old or something. I have the most muscle mass now by far. I have 17-inch arms now. I never had anywhere near that when competing. And I just train biceps way more. I train upper back way more. I'm literally, right now, I may look like pretty similar to how I have on my channel before, but I'm 210 pounds right now. So if I cut down to 190, I'm going to look way leaner on my channel than I did on my channel. Was like 180, So I have way more muscle mass now. Now, that being said, as far as strength, I would say, my conventional deadlift strength is stronger than ever. I'd say my squat strength was at strongest when I squat 625. So when I last competed around the end of COVID, so it was, I think around 2021 actually, where I totaled 1675. And then I was attempting a 1700 pound total, and I snapped my hamstring on a 716 pound deadlift. And it was kind of all she wrote as far as, like, I mentioned this in my video on why I'm done pulling sumo, is like, I really didn't have that deep of a desire to pull like 716 or 722 after that. Cause it's just like, all right. That was already more than I planned on deadlifting. And that was at 182 pounds. Okay, wait. Damn, son, this is the HD live stream. Shout out to Candito. Absolutely. Hey, you know what? That's also another thing, especially if you guys want to ask about, or if anyone wants to pay $4.99 and have the members only streams, is if you ever want to ask about camera questions or YouTube specific questions, I know I would be confident to say I know more about cameras than anybody in powerlifting. And I genuinely mean that. Favorite movie? Ooh, that's a good one. I would have to say, Inception, maybe my favorite. I don't know. I hate to be the guy who says The Matrix, but The Matrix might be. I'd say The Matrix, Inception, and Moana. That's my top 3. Actually, I really like Moana because I really like Pixar, and I find that the most immersive and it's like the most believable. What I really don't like is I don't like Avengers, I don't like Marvel, I don't like anything where there's real people and then so much CGI where I'm like, I just don't believe it. It's just, and it's just, obviously it's just not that interesting too. Hey, we have a super chat. Hello, Johnny. Quad tendon / patellar tendon fix by Pablo Z. Man, I feel a sense of duty now that you paid for a super chat to give you a great answer. That's a tough question. So as far as quad tendon issues, the good news with tendonitis is there's really two things. One is actually Brandon Tietz has a fantastic video on this. So I'd search Brandon Tietz tendonitis. So he has videos where basically he addresses knee tendonitis, and he did a lot of board slant squats with no load actually, and just really training on tolerating shear force over and over again. I believe he did that something like every day. So that's a huge tool to use. And then secondly, on top of that is you really have to control for volume. You have to. It's the good news about tendonitis is that since it's not an acute injury, typically, it's more of a chronic issue, is you can actually manage it simply by just dialing everything down and just dial things down by 1 to 2 sets. A good way to approach it would be dial it down by, let's say, 20% of your set volume across weeks. So if you usually squat for, let's say, 3 sets on one day with 3 sets of quad accessory, and then another day you squat for 4 sets of pause squats or something like that. So let's say you have something like 8 to 12 total sets on your legs. To then just dial that down and just dial it down to 6 total weekly sets. So then maybe you do 3 sets, but no quad accessory at all on one day. And then the other day you do 3 sets instead of 4 sets of pause squats. And then on top of that, also do that slant board squat so that you're targeting the limiting factor. So combining both of those is important, because if you only add in rehab movements while training normally still, then you're actually adding volume onto the prime mover and onto the agitation point, which actually can make things worse. So that's the tricky balance. But yeah, no matter what, it always comes down to that, to the acute to chronic fatigue ratio. So I think you absolutely should be able to handle it. And then also one other detail to just keep in mind is, does it flare up the most at the start of your workout or at the end of your workout? If it flares up the most at the start of your workout, that could be more of an intensity issue from the day before or a couple days before. Whereas if it flares up the most at the end of your workout, that's where then it's more likely to be a volume issue. So look for those little signs. And also typically keeping frequency up relatively high while also having low volume per session makes it easier to make these adjustments. So I'd likely actually squat 3 days a week and then just have low volume of just like maybe 2 working sets or lower RPE and spread that out, as opposed to then having just 2 days a week, or even one. If you have one big leg day, that absolutely is actually the primary cause, most likely. Take that, spread it out, but keep volume the same or lower while spreading that out over the total week. Okay, the public wants a Candito tribute to Big Lenny. Hey, I can't be too fake because I haven't watched enough of him, but God rest his soul, and I hope he's Christian. Actually, you know what? I will actually pray for him, seriously. So everyone, pray for Big Lenny. Especially if you go to church Sunday. If you go to church tomorrow, pray for Big Lenny. When they say pray in the silence of your hearts, for intentions of the silence of your hearts, pray for Big Lenny's soul, seriously. Does YouTube take a cut of the membership subscription? Yes. So it takes 30%. So, it is what it is. But that's actually not that bad of a ratio, but it is what it is. What made you go for the V for Vendetta facial hair look? I feel like it just fit. I'm Italian, so it just naturally flows, right? Thoughts on the Evolve? I just have nothing to add to that. Thoughts on the Evolve AI powerlifting app? It's one that I currently use. I still am paying for the Forever program because I want to support you. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. I really appreciate that. As far as the Evolve AI app, I've been on record saying what I have seen. If it's the same that's associated with Juggernaut AI, I'm actually not sure now that I think about it. Because I remember there was a Juggernaut AI and then there was a spinoff of it. But then also Evolve might actually be from somewhere else. So if it's the spinoff of Juggernaut AI, I have found that it's typically excessive volume. But I could be wrong. So If it's not related to Juggernaut AI app, I have no opinion. If it is, Juggernaut AI app, I've been hard on before. It's been excessive volume before from what I've seen. But I've noticed Brandon Campbell has a lot of success on it. So ultimately, when it comes to these things, I always just say, just look at the results. Is that if the results are good and it's reliable, then by all means, keep going. I do think that anything involving AI right now is a gimmick as far as that name. But if it gives you results and you're injury-free and you're not spamming volume in an unsustainable way, then by all means, keep going. Okay. Do you think you can lift in a second floor without collapsing through the ground? I built a platform to distribute the weight kind of like a pallet. I think you can. I don't know if you want to, I don't know if you want to find out. I think you can though. I think you can. Just the idea. I mean, if you're wrong, it's gonna be a rough night. Sumo strength off the floor is weak. I suspect it's because I do too much touch and go. Any recommendations? Don't do touch and go. that is literally it. Do not do touch and go. And in the long run, it's actually normal for off the floor to be the weak point of a sumo deadlift. That's typically a good sign. So stop doing touch and go. And then the only second thing that could possibly be the case is your hips might be set too low. I would have to do a form check, to verify that if so. I have one meet end of November, then potentially another meet 3 months after. What would you make the focus of the 3 months? That's a great question. Well, for what I would do, for example, on the Forever program, I would do the 10 rep max squat program, which is a 5-week phase. Basically volume squats for 5 weeks. Then I would shift into basically an 8-week or however you have to fit it, like a 7-week peak. So then I would have to decide between, do you want either 2 blocks or one long, more linear periodization style program? I would, if really needing it in that way, I would probably do blocks just because it'd be slightly easier to time the peak. So I do that, like I said, I would do it some type of squat volume focus where squat and bench are prioritized. Deadlift is still there, but slightly secondary, and just have one competition deadlift day, one like RDL type day. And then as you shift then into the blocks, then do, you would have to decide whether you want to do top sets of 2s on that next phase and then singles leading into the meet, or if you want to go right into singles leading to RP9 a month out from the meet, then reset and then go back into it. So I'd say if you have only 7 weeks after that first 5 weeks, then I would likely do singles starting 7 weeks out and do a 4-week rising. So RP 5, 6, 7, 8, or actually RP 6, 7, 8, 9, then reset and then go RP 6, 7, 8, and then meet actually 6.5, 7.5, 8.5 1 week out and then max out. So you want to make sure that the 1 week out is still heavier than 1 week prior to that RP9 that was a month out. Hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, you definitely have plenty of time. Hi, Johnny. Just want to say that if someone is having doubts on running the Candito Forever program, it is totally worth it. Added over 100 pounds to my total after 1 year with no gains. Thank you very much, Aldrin. Thank you. That means the world to me. Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's something I've put so much time and thought into, and I could, if I planted a comment, it would be that. So thank you, which I didn't. And I believe I've seen you on the form checks, right, Aldrin? So thank you very much. That's what I do it for. And to be clear, the Forever program, a lot of it is based off of real world client data. Like I obsessively went over clients where it's like, okay, what worked well, what didn't work well. And because a lot of times you do certain things and then you realize like, oh, okay, so this scheme that I like to go to, did it actually work well or did I think it worked well? And then just really reassessing a lot of that. That took me like 8 months just to, get everything set exactly how I wanted it. But yeah, I'm really proud of it. Okay, at 75 kilograms with 1 rep maxes of 195 to 200 kilogram squat, 125 kilogram bench, and 245 kilogram deadlift. Small of junior boosted my bench. Candito 6-week improved my squat and deadlift, and the Russian squat program built my squat strength, but left me fatigued. Now with better gains of recovery on a 12-week cycle, what programming would you suggest to balance strength and recovery? Well, if you're asking me, I'm going to say the Forever program. That's my opinion. That's ultimately why I made it. I would say, for example, the 10-week program is very, very up to date with how I recommend, balancing some variables. I would say given your background, you could probably actually add a set on the primary day of squats. If you ran V1 of the 10-week program, you could probably do a back off 4x5 instead of a back off 3x5 on the primary day, and then keep the variation day the same, the light day the same. So basically having like a high bar or low bar pause squat day, then a light 3x4, 3x3, or 4x2 comp squat day, and then that primary day with the main double, the main single, and then a back off 3x5 or 4x5. And then that day typically has optional leg extensions. So typically you're going to want a little bit more of a block structure at the stage that you're at, because you're reaching the point where now you can start to manipulate the variables in your favor. And you can say, okay, now I find out I can handle, if you can handle one set more, it's very easy to do that. Whereas it's really hard to balance that on some of those other programs where it's just preset percentages, it's not RPE, and then there may be these rep range changes where it's like you're riding the wave and you're either on it or you're off it. So that would be my recommendation. And actually, I'll probably do the 3-rep max program paired with the 10-week program, which would be a 15-week mesocycle. If you really wanted to, you could manually cut down the 10-week program into an 8-week program and run it that way, 3-rep max phase, which is, like I said, it's 5 weeks. And then you could run an 8-week program to then make it 13 weeks if you really wanted to just, in that case, just remove week 1 from the 10-week program and then also remove week 5. And then it would work. So hopefully not too confusing. Is the Candito 6-week actually coming? I've been waiting for 2 months since you announced it. Also thoughts on if Taylor was going to get back to the 74 kilogram to the top of it. Yes, the 6-week program is actually coming. The reason why it takes so long sometimes is because I really want to not only hammer out these ideas, but I want to make them fit with how I program now. But then also, so it's a tricky balance. It fit with how I program now, but then also you refine it, but you don't lose the original intent. And that's the key, because the 6-week program really is not how I program now as far as like the flow of it. It's just more aggressive. It's more in your face. So the question is then, do I extend it out until block, or do I keep the waves, but then make it more sub-max? Is the high difficulty of it across weeks the most important thing? Like identifying what truly is the nature of the program. And then, because overall, no matter what, I want to, basically the volume is going to end higher than it was at before. And then the peak volume is going to be slightly reduced to basically smooth it out just a little bit and just make it a little bit smarter. That's the overall intent that I know for sure I'm going to do. And then it's just a matter of how exactly to do it while keeping the original intention. And then lastly, one thing I do want to do with the 6-week is I want it to be a program that athletes could run, that someone interested in general strength could run. And then that would also differentiate it from the 8-week program, for example, which is really my optimized recommendation. So there's just a lot of that, of just figuring out like, okay, how do I really make sure this connects with the target audience and isn't just something where I'm just throwing it against the wall. Like I really want to take my time with this, which is what I'm doing, but we're getting to that point. I'm struggling to stay consistent with my energy during long training sessions. I feel strong at the start, but I'm gassing out by the time I do later sets. Okay, so with this, the biggest thing is you want to set yourself up for success. That is so important. So, that being said, what I would likely do is make a real sacrifice to what you're doing. So let's say, for example, on your secondary day, you're doing high rep competition deadlifts, then you're also doing RDLs, and then you're finishing with like a quad accessory or something like that. At that point, you just got to cut something. So you got to say, either I'm just going to do my competition deadlift secondary day, just be competition deadlifts for lighter weight, higher reps, but then skip the RDLs completely. Or the inverse, just do RDLs and skip and just have one-time competition deadlift, one-time RDLs, alternating like that. You want to find a setup where it's exciting to you and where it's not just beating you into the ground. And that's a tricky thing. It's a really, really tricky thing. And that is where things become very individualized. But I would say, hands down, you don't want to just fully accept that your energy just feels like crap. Now, the second thing, and this is a huge one, is to really try to warm up as fast as possible. So especially lately, I've been doing warm-ups where I'll warm up with 265 on squat as my first warm-up, and then go 265, 375, and then maybe 1 or 2, and then I'm in the working set. So doing something like that where you get to your top set in maybe half the time, that can give you a tremendous benefit. Because then a lot of times what will happen is then your top set doesn't go perfectly, but it goes well enough. and then your accessories go better because now you just have more time. But like I said, if you are doing, let's say, 2 to 3 exercises dedicated to a lift and then also a different lift. So if you're doing pause squats and then also 2 to 3 deadlift movements or deadlift focused movements, counting like machine work, then you could just reduce that by one set on, or one exercise on that. And typically I find actually reducing a whole exercise is better for energy than reducing a set or two when it comes to that topic specifically. Because it also takes a lot of time just to warm up on a new movement. Hey, someone says listening to while warming up. Excellent. Okay, so to just take the 2 to 3 day break and continue the program as is, you said, hello, Johnny, currently running the 10-week program. I have a delay day 2 of week 8 on the program because it will land exactly on Christmas. What do you suggest that I do? I would say to just take the 2 to 3 day break and continue the program as it is, because you're getting later into the program. And the later you get into a program, the more important it is to just ride everything out as it is, because you're not going to be able to really rebuild volume. You don't want to try to rebuild volume. Just accept the fact that you're going to be a little fresher. That first day back, you might actually be a little too strong relative to what you actually want. And it could compromise the peak. It is possible. But that being said, you want to just find out. And so sometimes actually having that extra 2 to 3 days of rest actually ends up making the whole cycle go better. So it's totally possible. But you don't want to do any other intricate adjustment because it will just make things worse. How long should a reintroduction to powerlifting take after a 1-year bodybuilding phase? Well, I would say 4 weeks if you're just talking about basic readiness. So for example, the intro phase on the Forever program is 4 weeks long, and then you hit AMRAP PRs and then boom, go right into the rest of what you're going to do. Now that being said, if you have numbers that you've already hit and you're concerned that your strength isn't at a certain level because you have a deeper history, something like that, then that may take longer. At that point though, I would say after 4 weeks, no matter what, after 4 weeks, you basically want to assume that that period is over. Your work capacity should be pretty much caught up. You should be able to then start to add in a little bit more specificity later on. So you want to start out with, let's say, 1 time a competition deadlift, 1 time either pause deadlifts or stiff leg deadlifts. And then on that second phase, as far as after the first 4 weeks, then you can go to a full regular 8-week, 2 4-week mesocycles, or you could do a full 12-week mesocycle with 3 4-week phases. So you could have a 4-week intro and then the 3 4-week phase setup. But in that first phase of after transitioning out, that's when then you can consider twice a week competition deadlifts or going from 2 times squats to 3 times squats. So no matter what, the first 4 weeks, I would do no more than 2 times a week on the squat. And I would definitely not even do deadlifts twice a week on the competition deadlift yet, so that then you save that up and then you have that in your back pocket. And that way you just continue to build across phases. So even if you're just feeling okay, then you still know that you have something to look forward to and to push it to another level. Okay, let's see. How did you train weighted pull-ups, frequency, intensity, etc.? Okay, this is a great question. So I actually had a program for pull-ups that I was going to have, but then I ended up just not releasing it because I don't think the audience was, the audience is there for it for sure, but it's just not my focus like that to support it long-term. So basically, one of the key points when it comes to weighted pull-ups is you want to have 3 sets on a certain volume day, like let's say a primary day. Let's say you do hit a heavy single, something like that starting out. So you hit your heavy single. Then after that, you want to have 3 sets taken to RP7 or 3 sets taken to RP8, but use the fixed load and just let the reps end up wherever they're going to end up at. So let's say you start out with just 10 pounds attached, and then you just take that 3 sets to RP8, and then go high hype on the first set, low hype on the second set, and then high hype on that last set. And the reason why is that typically if you go too hard on that second set, that's when then the third set is just going to be absolute crap. Whereas if you do let that second set be low hype on purpose, so low excitement, then that last set you'll be able to hit more reps than that second set. And sometimes you're able to rival that first set actually. So let's imagine you have 1 single with like 90 pounds attached. Then you go to the back off work. You have just 10 pounds attached. You do a set of 18 reps with 10 pounds attached. Then that second set you do only like 12 reps or 11 reps. Then that third set you hit 16 to 17 reps because now it's high excitement. So that's a really good setup. And then on that primary day, simply just add 5 to 10 pounds of fixed load and then continue taking it to RP 8 on every set and just let it fall where it may. And then do that for 4 weeks and then, or actually 3 weeks, then deload on that 4th week and then reset like that. And then the next time you reset, start with 20 pounds across blocks. So that's a great way on the primary day to ensure that you're pushing yourself sufficiently hard. Now, when it comes to the variation day, or not variation day, when it comes to the more kind of low to mid rep day, a little bit more technical focused, that's where then you could do your 5x5 type days where you're a little bit more RPE focused and just consistently RP focused, and then maybe not as predetermined of a load jump. So do a 5x5. And then if you can add 5 pounds while staying within half an RP, then do it. But if you have to use the same load as last week, then also do it. So have one day where it's a little bit more static and then one day where it's pre-planned and ramping up. But the main thing is typically you want to pair your higher reps on the primary day so that then those higher reps are less of a negative effect. So you want that 5x5 day to carry you into then the single day. So you're not really like burning yourself out on any one set and you're doing enough volume to actually really get in the groove. Then you hit that single. Then you can start to push yourself with the higher RPE, bodybuilding work right after that big single on that primary day. That way it's the farthest away from the next single. Okay. Okay, we got a lot of questions. Thanks, Johnny. Love the videos. Oh, thank you very much, Barry. You have $5 Canadian, which I forget the conversion that is to USD. Thank you very much. Thank you guys for any super chats. Greatly appreciated. When will you start taking steroids? I will never take steroids. Hey, you know what's funny is that I've always said I'll never take steroids, since the beginning of this channel. I've said that since way back in the day. And I'll never forget, for the life of me, I'll never forget someone saying, well, you shouldn't make such an extreme statement. Maybe you will someday take steroids. It's like, I know 100% I never will. But anyways, what I'm getting to is that what's funny is that now, since I'm Catholic, it's actually technically a sin to take steroids, especially illegally. So depending on how you read certain things, if you break certain laws, it's actually a venial sin at least, just on that principle alone. So that's actually kind of funny to think about. Like, we're not the same. I don't just not take steroids just because I don't like them. I can't. It's against my faith. Hey, I think this is a member. It said, great to catch you live. The wife is out with her boyfriend, so time to kick back with an IPA and just watch your Q&A. Thank you very much. Hopefully the wife this is up to the standard where she's like, yeah, this is extremely sophisticated entertainment. Excellent choice. That puts the pressure on me, though. You ever explore Protestantism or Orthodox camps? Why Catholic over those? I also know many strong lifters from those camps. Always cool to see strong people with strong faith. Yeah, I actually used to be Protestant. So I was non-denominational, essentially. I would say non-denominational with some Calvinist beliefs that I didn't even know were Calvinist, as far as some principles, like once saved, always saved, things like that, where I definitely took the Calvinist side initially. And then really, if I could give 2 people who influenced me the most to become Catholic, to where I just became fully convinced, is Joe Heschmeyer and Christian Wagner. So Christian Wagner is Scholastic Answers, and I cannot recommend him enough. Scholastic Answers, I mean, he's insanely in-depth, but also The Popery is a YouTube channel, Joe Heschmeyer. So all of those arguments completely convinced me. Even when it comes to orthodoxy, Christian Wagner is really good on that, as far as the Filioque and stuff like that, as far as how the relations of the Trinity and how it all works out, to where I definitely take the Catholic side on that specific issue. I also do find it on a gut instinct level between Catholic and Orthodox. I actually think those two are the closest. If I wasn't Catholic, I would be Orthodox, because technically the Catholic view is that Orthodox do have, and I won't be too long on this, is that Orthodox do have valid sacraments. So I actually really like going to Eastern Orthodox or Eastern Catholic Mass also. So stylistically, it's basically similar style as Orthodox, but they're in communion with the Pope. And overall, one issue as far as gut feeling that I have is that I find it very unlikely that the one true church would be, I know this is like just a gut feeling, would be less widespread. The fruits of the Catholic Church have made me 100% believe that makes the most sense. Now, again, I obviously also do actually take the Catholic view on specific topics, like especially the sacrament of confession. I've seen some critiques as far as they think, Catholics are too black and white with it. And I'm like, nah, I find the Catholic arguments there to be convincing. But as far as Protestantism, I actually think that one's way more intuitive now to me, that it actually doesn't really make sense that for the first 1,500 years, the correct view was basically hidden, but also preserved by the church that hid it at the same time. And why would an active God allow that to happen? And there's so many other issues as far as translations and things like that, where issues that I thought completely supported Protestantism. It's like, obviously people who speak the language and interpret it and have certain views of the Eucharist since the beginning of the church aren't just wrong for no reason. I figured it out, 2,000 years later. Okay, not to go. And again, obviously I'm not dissing Protestants. I understand, there are absolutely really strong, really smart Protestants. I'd say Voice of Reason versus James White debate, I think summarizes why I'm Catholic rather than Protestant very well. But Orthodoxy, it's always going to be an interesting debate. Why is it that most powerlifting coaches really ignore biceps? Well, it's really simple. It's because biceps don't really do anything for powerlifting. That's really it. Hey, Johnny's benching once a week, but focusing on accessories like triceps and front delts better than training bench 3 times a week, but not as much accessory work. No. For your bench, no. Hands down, no. That one is not even close. Your bench will be dramatically stronger benching 3 days a week than it will be focusing on bodybuilding work and 1 times a week bench. I would say when it comes to natural lifters, I don't think I know of a single natural lifter who benches 1 time a week and gets even close to optimal results. What's the secret behind the video quality in your content? It's some of the best I've ever seen, even compared to some of the biggest channels on YouTube. Thank you very much. It's actually something I take extremely, extremely seriously. And actually, when it comes to my occupation, I talk to my wife about this all the time. I actually might end up being a wedding videographer or some level of videographer at some point in my life. Like, that's definitely something I will pursue. Because I take it super seriously. So I use, as far as what I recommend and what I use a Panasonic S5 II. So I actually have a specific workflow when it comes to HDR videos that nobody does. Not a single tech YouTuber does. And when it comes to HDR workflow, it's a very specific thing. So you have to master it to 1,000 nits. You have to know your intended screen. That's why I also have mentioned before that's made for an iPhone, because iPhone does actually a really good job at standardizing the colors and the color space. For example, it's 99.9% of the DCI P3 color space is every iPhone. And they actually do a really good job at keeping it neutral, unlike Samsung. I won't go too deep, but all I'll say is I have learned more about HDR than I will say probably almost every tech YouTuber. I've spent an insane amount of time just because I love it, though. Candito, man, before I move on, also, one thing I will say is, obviously it goes without saying, that a prime lens goes a long way. So right now I'm recording on a Sigma 50mm f1.4 lens, Panasonic S5 II. So just in case you're curious. And also, one thing I do purposely is that if you want to stand out on YouTube, do something no one else is doing. So that's why I wish I had it with me. I have a 105mm f1.4 Sigma lens, which is gigantic. It's like 2.5 pounds or 2.8 pounds. It's just a big hulking lens. And the reason why I use it in the gym especially is because who else is doing that? Nobody. And I might start a camera channel because this gets along kind of the philosophy of also how to approach things. Is so many people use a wide angle lens because it's easier. Well, then guess what? That's what most people are doing then. So it's not going to stand out. Do you watch Trent Horn? 100%. I think that Trent Horn, it's weird because the videos that he misses on are like the Candace Owens oriented videos. You could fill in the blanks if you understand what I'm talking about. I'm not going to go beyond that. He does have a little bit of a weird centrism to him sometimes, where it seems like he really kind of has like a bitterness to like a certain camp within within Catholicism sometimes. But that being said, Trent Horn overall is amazing, and I think his videos on abortion especially are excellent. But again, we're not gonna talk about politics too much. But to be fair, you brought up religious, principles. So that's actually completely fine. So that was on me. I shouldn't have, pulled any politics into it. But yeah, Trent Horn is amazing. So I'd say Trent Horn, Joe Heschmeyer, and Christian Wagner, aka Scholastic Answers. That's the trio right there if you're interested in Catholicism. And of course, Thomas Aquinas himself in Thomism. I am a huge fan of Thomism. A Thomist enjoyer. How would you rate your old programs, the free ones I used to do, and what do you think of them in general? Well, this gets exactly along with the theme, is that I'm going to make a new 6-week program this coming Saturday. So as far as what I think about them, I think it's interesting. I mean, with my linear program, I also redid that for the Forever program. I think they're really good. I think they're really good overall. So it's actually something where it's not like I look back and I go, dang, that was stupid. Probably only the bench on the 6-week program. That's probably the one where I'm like, yeah, that was the least influenced by myself. That was the most influenced by like certain Russian programs and what my dad had me do. And then I did it myself, but it was a lot of kind of that philosophy kind of going into it. Whereas the parts that I especially came up with the most on my own, I really still stand by them. And I will say overall, the biggest difference is that now I see more value in consistent volume as opposed to as much fluctuation. And that's by far the biggest thing. So 6-week program, week 2 is so hard. And then it goes, really low volume with like 3 sets or 1 set of squats by week 4 and 5. And you really hang around that low volume for weeks 4 to 6, essentially. So it's mostly a matter of just evening things out where it ends on higher volume and peaks at lower volume. But other than that, it's not anything where I look at it and go, wow, that was stupid. Actually, I look at it and I go, it's interesting. Sometimes I look at it and I'm like, I kind of want to run that. Hey, Candito, if someone runs Smoloff 2 or 3 times with no issues, do you advise them I'm running it 3 times? Yearly, it did wonders on my bench and I can run it again, no problem. Yeah, I mean, I do have the general philosophy that as long as something works, just run it. Now, in the long term, could that potentially cause some issues? Yes. But I have no problem with someone who runs specificity until they can't, but then really be quick to get off of it when that time comes. So the moment you hit that wall, wash your hands of it, start to build mass, start to do dumbbell bench with higher RPE, lower total weekly set volume, so that then you can push yourself harder and build more muscle. Because ironically, a lot of bodybuilding actually a slightly lower set count, but much higher RPE, much closer to failure on some of those variations in accessories. Thoughts on the idea of a calorie surplus is not necessary for optimizing muscle growth because hypertrophy is signaling dependent and not energy dependent. I liked that video. I saw it was an Asian woman who made that video. I like it. Now, I do think some of the mechanistic type arguments, like the way she defended mechanistic data, I thought was strange as far as saying that mechanistic data is actually really good because otherwise all we have is correlations, which I don't find to be true at all because that's the whole point of replication in science. The whole point of a meta-analysis is that you whittle out false correlations. They were just like ice cream increases and crime increases, therefore ice cream increases crime. Like that was, her point was if you look at end result data and not mechanisms, that's what you're going to get. But that's not really true. You just rerun other studies. Now, I understand she could say, well, because of mechanisms, we know how to rerun a study that's similar. But anyways, I didn't find that point compelling. And I do find mechanistic data to be weaker, absolutely, than outcome data when it comes to exercise science. I think that is 100% true. I will die on that hill because it's very similar to the stretch-mediated hypertrophy. Is that when they finally put it to the test, there was no meaningful difference. Now, they did also do certain things that were a little, weird. But it's funny because she was actually also against Jeff Nippert on that issue, and I actually agreed with her on that. So anyways, the main point is, I think, and this will be the last thing I say on this, is that I think the biggest thing that people don't understand is that bulking and cutting, and I've stood on this issue, I've stood on business on this issue, being more against bulking and cutting in principle. Because the main reason bulking and cutting exists in the traditional way are 2 reasons. One is because natural bodybuilders reach a level of low body fat percentage that is hormonally detrimental to a point where they cannot sustain it. So that necessitates bulking and cutting, even if your bulking ends up being 14% body fat. The problem is, and I myself am doing this, I'm not going to lie, am much higher in body fat percentage than I really need to be. Like I said, I'm 5'7", 210 right now. There really is no reason for me to do this other than just fun. As far as optimizing building muscle. Now, don't get me wrong. I am optimizing building muscle otherwise. Like I'm building more muscle than ever before, but I'm also just putting some extra sauce on it for fun. Now, so the main thing is that I think this is why it's important to look at the mechanisms, is a lot of people just think about surplus and deficit in isolation of the hormonal environment and in isolation of body fat percentage. So if you're going from, like I said, if you're going from 6.5% body fat at 148 pounds on stage, like Jeff Nippard when he was in his prime bodybuilding on stage, he was probably a really small guy at that point, but he looked amazing. Then if you get up to 14% body fat, you're going to look good and you're going to be way bigger. And maybe he's 178 pounds in the off season. And then that's a fair bulk and cut. That's a whole 30 pounds. But again, his worst point is where most people's end point is. And his end point is a place that no one's going to go in the right mind unless they're competing. And then the second issue that I have with this along a similar, idea is that untested bodybuilders use drugs. So they're blasting drugs and they're using cutting agents. They're using drugs in a way that's not going to be similar to someone who doesn't compete, let alone someone who doesn't use drugs. And I've noticed that also in powerlifting, that a lot of untested powerlifters, they train so, unspecific in the off season because they can afford to do so, because they turn it up with drugs. And it's a matter of just sustaining their health in the meantime, in between those waves. So again, I'm not against bulking and cutting, but I do think there's a reason why basically since the inception of YouTube, you've always seen this push towards moderate and minor bulks and cuts as opposed to these bigger waves. And I don't think the mechanisms matter that much. Do you still stand by your deadlift program? I've got a newborn and I'm running it leading up to deadlift only comp. That's a good question. I would say, I think the deadlift program's one where definitely I would change some things for sure. Do I think it's ridiculous? Do I think you're screwed? No. Do I think it's good enough? Yes. Do I stand by it in that I would be like, hell yeah, this is like, go for it, do this one? Probably not. Probably not, because the main reason is just because, to get back to what I talked about before, is the main thing that I've changed is just having less quick phases and having more blocks. So if I were to adjust the program, for example, instead of having the secondary day go from, I believe it's like 4x3, 4x2, 3x1 or something like that, I would just now have it, if it's going to be that short of a phase, just be something like 4x2s that whole time and then just ramp up and load. That's basically what the secondary day is on the 8-week program and on the other programs as well on the 10-week. So that's really the main change. I do like the 2 times a week on snatch grip deadlifts or stiff leg deadlifts, depending on what exercise you do. So there are some aspects I like as far as a specialization program. So that's why, again, I don't really dislike it. And I do think the reps going down on the primary day, being like, I think it's like 2x7 or 3x6, 3x5, and then a deload on that 3rd week. Again, I would just have it be the deload on a 4th week if doing it that way. Have 3 good weeks of volume on the pause deadlifts even. So I'd just do things a little bit differently, but I actually don't hate on that at all as far as keeping that even RPE. And in fact, sometimes I find that block periodization does do worse than keeping even RPE while fluctuating reps on the deadlift. I've definitely seen some real world cases. I actually have a client right now who's in that position. So overall, I would say it's not something I unrecommend, but it's something that definitely long-term I would extend the phases and flatten out some phases. And that's pretty much it. What should I do if one of my main lifts is lagging? Okay, this is a great question. So you should really break this down a few ways. Is that first you want to look at technique. So you want to see, is there any obvious technique issue? Is there anything you just want to try differently? And then you consider that. Now, usually it's not that, so then you move on to the next thing. On the next thing, typically what it's going to be is it's typically going to be adding a day. I would say most likely. So the most subtle thing you could do is just add a set or 2 while keeping the frequency the same. But if someone's main lift is lagging to a point where we know like your squat hasn't moved in a long time, then that's where we're at the point where it's like, okay, we need a 3rd day of squats. And that can radically change things, even if it's just a light day in between the variation day or secondary day and then the primary day. Just having a 3rd light day that's a primer. That can absolutely be a game changer. So I would probably add frequency as my number 1 most realistic choice. And then from there, obviously adjusting volume and all these things and making sure you're eating enough and all that. So there's always a bunch of details that go into it. Obviously, it's something that would require a lot of specific questions. But I'd say generally speaking, that's what I look at. The only exception is the deadlift. Typically the deadlift, you definitely don't want to deadlift more than twice a week, almost ever. I would say it's just never worth going that route just for that reason. But you could definitely go from a primary day and then variation day to then a primary day and then a secondary day of high rep deadlifts. And that's something that's in Angelo Fortino's program, is very similar to that, where it's primary day and then high rep, 2 sets of high rep day, primary day, 2 sets high rep day, just really fluctuated like that. So there's definitely a lot of ways that you can go about it. Are you the real Mr. Miyagi of powerlifting? I try my best. Is strength gain rate affected by body fat percentage? It depends on how you look at things. I would say no in any linear way. I mean, definitely the heavier you are, obviously, the more potential you have to get stronger. Because the thing about strength gain is a lot of it's not just strength, it's also how you use your leverage. So let's say your squat potential, for example, if you are, let's say 280 pounds, and you're above 30% body fat percentage, your squat potential is going to actually be really high. Even if starting out, you're squatting like 315 right now, you will get to a 405 squat easily faster than someone else. But it more so has to do with leverage than it does actual body fat percentage. Because you could technically make the argument that higher body fat percentage is correlated to low testosterone, which it is. Absolutely. It's the number one factor of low testosterone in the macro. But that's unlikely to be as big of a factor as the leverage change that's going to be in your favor. So, how to find the ideal deadlift volume and frequency, sets/week for yourself, or do you even find the ideal volume on any of the, or even how do you find it on any of the lifts? That's a great question. So, yeah, obviously a lot of it comes down to experimentation. It is tricky because you want to throw. First, the best way to do it is you want to throw a vision at yourself first and then just see how it works. So running a program, just run it straight up and just say, what happened? And then after you see what happened, then you say, okay, obviously, are you satisfied? Did it go well? Did it not go well? Did it go okay? But then beyond that, you also say, how did you feel? That's a part of it. So if you felt really good, then you go, okay, maybe you can do a little bit more. The biggest thing is that if you don't see any signal, do more. So that's the biggest thing that I think a lot of people get stuck at, especially initially when they're not training hard enough, is they just don't really see much of anything. They're like, well, some days I'm strong, some days I'm not. It doesn't seem like my baseline's moving. It's just like a glimmer of hope, then nothing. Glimmer of hope, then nothing. That means you just got to train way harder. You just got to throw something else at yourself to where you're pushing RDLs harder, or you're pushing stiff leg deadlifts harder, or add a heavier day on deadlifts more consistently. Maybe hit RB8 every single week, something like that. You need something to get a signal going. And then you go, okay, then now you can see which week you're the strongest. And then typically if you push it too much, you'll find that you're stronger on like week 3 than a week 4. And then that means you're really throwing a lot at yourself early on, as opposed to making it to where it's something you can adapt to. So I'd say that's probably the single best way to look at initially. Now, obviously, the big part of it is exercise selection is its own variable, and that really interplays a lot with this. Some people can handle a good amount of volume with a pretty even split, but then once they shift more towards specificity, it needs to be one moderate volume day, one low volume day, like that. So you have to find which camp you fall into with that. Mario says, been watching for 10 years. Thank you for everything. Thank you very much. That's awesome to hear, Mario. And that's awesome. That's what I love, is that some of you guys have been around for that long. I really appreciate that. How is it possible for you to make any gains compared to the Merc when you are natty? Are you talking about blah? The ultimate? Are you talking about Hemingway? You can always make gains natty. The biggest thing is that when it comes to training styles that you don't have that much experience in, you have a ton of room. So for myself, I've only been training biceps and arms seriously for probably 3.5, more than that, probably 5 years out of a total of like 18 years of training, maybe 5 years of serious bicep training, where I can say that actually was like respectable. And even then, I would say the past 2 years, I've trained it way better than ever before. I don't think I ever did actually 8 bicep sets in a workout ever until these past 2 years of having some days where it's a little bit higher volume. So if you never experiment with like really pushing yourself hard on a given day, harder than you ever have before, and seeing what happens, I think that's where you see a lot of the research look promising for really high volume. I do actually think that, the study where you could do 52 sets in a week, obviously that was really extreme. Mike Israel talked about that. It was a really extreme example, but I do think there's a lot of validity in a lot of these studies that we can push, set count to 15 sets a week, 18 sets a week, and see what happens. And I haven't even come close to that for so many body parts. Okay. Okay, I think we're going to probably wind down here for I'd say 15 more minutes. 15 more minutes, and then I'm going to wind down here. This is an AMA. This is an Ask Me Anything, and I want to know, are you working on a baby? Do you hear that? No, my wife's not here. She doesn't hear it. So here's the situation. So we were actually married civilly, and then basically I reverted to Catholicism. So I essentially converted. I was baptized Catholic, but this is the first time ever where I actually believe in Catholicism, with all my heart. So now we're actually in pre-Cana to get our marriage. I believe I forget what the word is. There's a word for civil marriage that then becomes official sacramentally through the church. So anyways, the basic point is that it's as if I'm not married right now. So actually right now I'm 100% abstinent. Don't even jerk it. Don't have sex. Don't kiss too deeply or anything. And it's very difficult. And obviously to anybody watching, if you watch pornography, stop doing that. Don't do that at all. But what's really hard is literally living like as a priest, as far as zero, like nothing is sexually permissible. That's what we're living, but we're going to get married February. So then immediately we're going to have as many kids as possible. I want 6 kids. She wants 4 kids. We'll have 5. Joseph, thank you for the $1.99 super chat. Yeah. Thank you guys. That really helps, and helps support the channel. The word is convalidate. You got that right. Exactly. Yeah. Convalidate. And ultimately it's just being treated the same as if we're just, not married. Like we're technically in a Josephite marriage. That's what they call it. So that I can receive the Eucharist. Hey, Candito, why do you never work your V-taper anymore? Well, right now I'm just bulked. Right now I'm 210 pounds. So that's why. I mean, it's not like there's anything I don't do as far as in the gym. Congratulations, man. Sorry for derailing. I just appreciate the candid response. We have number 3 on the way now. Oh, congratulations. No, that's not derailing at all. Like that's exactly what I want to do these for. So I want most of it to be informative, but I want at least 20% to just be off the wall things that I would not answer otherwise. Cause that's the fun of this is because with my videos, I already have the next 5 videos planned out. I want to do this, do a video with Ashton on overrated versus underrated. And it's a very tight window of topics. So I actually love just talking about real life. Any thoughts on trying to rerun your greatest blocks of a lift and it just falling flat? Outside variables are in check and routine is basically the exact same. Yeah, when it comes to something like that, that's where you just get to the point where you just have to admit that it's not the magical program anymore. And that's the thing is like everything changes. Actually, Mike Tashir had a great point about this, where like the ideal programming setup, you're always finding it, but it's always running away from you at the same time. So the biggest thing is to accept it. Like, accept it. Don't just blame that, it's just the circumstance. I wish I could, run it a little bit differently. Accept the fact that it probably is legitimately not your ideal program anymore. And that's because we're always changing. Okay, how do you feel about how about the low volume wave on social media, such as Paul Carter and Chris Beardsley work? Overall, I don't find it compelling. I find it to be... I saw Paul misrepresent research when it comes to RPE, where he was talking about how, low RPE in this meta-analysis shows that there are studies where it is effective, which does disprove effective reps to some meaningful extent as far as a hardcore, everything below RPE, 7 is basically ineffective, or below RPE, let's say 6, is 100% ineffective. I think the research has been very clear that that's not true. when you look at the meta-analysis and you look at the RPE range and then the percentage of positive increase in hypertrophy. And I mentioned on my channel that there was one where it's like RPE, I think it was like 4 to 6 reps in reserve. That was actually the strongest effect. Now, where I feel like he misrepresented is he said, well, there's a study where 8 reps in reserve was effective, and that's on the elderly. But it's like, it wasn't just one. You picked the study that was just a random one that was, yeah, you're right. That one is ridiculous if you make 8 reps in reserve for the cutoff. I actually do think there also might have been 1 or 2, even with that cutoff, that still were effective. The point is that if that theory is true, then truly there should be no 5 RIR work that basically has any positive adaptation. And they absolutely do. And there's just not clear support that, training to failure without considering volume and all these things, there's just no way to know for a fact that lower volume and training to failure is superior. So I think overall it's just I don't have a problem with it though. As far as I do think you need people like that in the industry who are pushing for a certain narrative, and then there's a counter narrative and all that. For example, there was a study that showed that RPE 9 on leg extensions was just as effective as RPE 10. And then a lot of guys who are promoting training to failure kind of like dialed it back and were like, yeah, this is why you train, to RP 9 as opposed to RP 10, but you still have to, push yourself hard, which of course is true, but you notice that those claims get refined because a lot of those guys trained to absolute failure before then. Also, with Chris Beardsley, he does say some goofy things about strength training. He is just wrong on some programs. He's blocked Sean Noriega, my friend, because he just got it wrong. As far as Chris did, he said he thought something like a 10x3 with like 85% or something. He said some combination that was not a very common combination at all. And he said like, well, that's common in strength training. It's like, it's not. The percentage was like completely out of whack. But also one thing I don't love with the Chris Beardsley argument is the argument that higher reps is more fatigue inducing relative to the stimulus. So therefore it's going to be less ideal in the medium to long term to do, let's say, reps over 12. And I think that that's a good example of mechanistically. I mean, it's an interesting case that he makes. I understand the argument and the points that he puts forth. But so far, in terms of actual end result research, outcome related data, we have not seen that 12 to 18 reps is less effective than 3x8. And in fact, there was actually a study where a 3x12 was very slightly more effective than a 4x8, I believe. And then a 7x4 was equal or less than that 3x12. So there's all sorts of studies that contradict things. And then every now and then you see someone, right? I did see Paul one time point out like one study that compared 4s and like 7s or 4s and 6s. And it was a 3x4 versus a 3x6. And he's like, see, it was the same gains regardless. And it's like, but we've seen Schoenfeld 7x3 being equal to a 3x10. And we've seen another one where it was a 3x4 versus a 3x8 versus a 3x12, something like that. And the 3x4 was the least. So it's just one of those things where when you see the totality of it, you see some points where, and I don't think it's intentional. Everybody has their bias. But I've seen some where I'm like, I know there are other ones that do not show that. Knees lock out too fast on the deadlift. If this is a sumo deadlift, I actually don't think this is a problem. Now, if it is a conventional deadlift, that would be a unique one. But if it's sumo, we actually do want our knees to lock out first. So a good way to look at it is just look at someone like Yuri Belkin, look at some of these other lifters, and you will notice that they lock out their knees clearly the first. And the reason why you want to do that on the sumo deadlift is because you want to make room for your underhand to then pull through. So you actually want to create space between you and the bar, leg drive, lock out the knee, and then bring your hips back. And you're not going to be able to just push your hips forward in a traditional way like a conventional. So assuming you mean sumo, I actually do not think it's a problem. Now, the only way it's a problem is if literally your torso angle is being moved forward as you do it. So look from the direct side. Is your torso angle staying still and then going up? That's good. Some people it goes up a little bit faster. Some people it stays steady and then up as far as they elongate the leg drive a little bit more. That would likely be you. If you're at a point where your torso angle actually actively tips forward and then up, that's where then it's a problem. But I'd say that's pretty rare to where I doubt it is. Pretty boring question. Do you still prefer a 10 millimeter or 13 millimeter belt? Yeah, I prefer, I still have the same recommendation, which is that I prefer a 13 millimeter suede belt or a 10 millimeter leather belt, typically for most people. So I typically do not prefer 13 millimeter leather because it tends to be too thick. And then a 10 millimeter suede tends to be way too thin. And no problem on that. I'm really fat and detrained due to extreme activity for many years. Should I lift first or run first? You definitely want to lift first, actually. And that's something that a lot of people would not suspect that I would say, but you actually do, because the thing is, when it comes to strength training, the benefits are numerous. So the benefits as far as your bone density, there's actually a study that proves that cardiovascular health improves significantly from lifting. So the idea that you want to avoid weight training and run as a GPP to prepare for that, general physical preparedness, I would say no, because you are actually going to miss out on the holistic benefits of lifting. And ultimately, what you have to look for is you want to scale everything gradually. So you want to do everything, but just a very minor level. So first, get in 8,000 steps a day if you haven't already. If you've gotten 8,000 steps, get 10,000 steps a day and lift 3 days a week. And then just build like that and then expand out. I would actually focus on probably 10,000 steps a day before any type of active cardio where you're actually getting your heart rate up into that, aerobic zone, because all-cause mortality is very heavily correlated with steps per day. And that's been, quite well researched. One of the more well-researched things that we have in all of physical science, I would actually say, because it's been across cultural and all that, and Japan studies and so on and so forth. So, but right around that 8,000, 7,500 to 8,000 step, but consistently, to where you're actually averaging it every day, that tends to be the point where all-cause mortality decreases the most, and then it does flatline from there. So I'd say actually 10,000 is a little bit more of a bonus. Okay, I think we are going to have to wrap this up. This has been an hour and a half, hour 25 minutes, so I will do two more questions. Okay, I'm trying to pick a really good one. Okay. Someone says you were living in pleasant sin. Is that about the pornography point, or? That'd be funny if you were just saying that about something with lifting. One thing I will say, as far as if you're talking about marriage, as far as marriage within the Catholic Church versus without it, is that the view actually isn't that marriages outside the Catholic Church are 100% not real. They actually are real. It has to do with intent and everything. So the actual official belief would be, if you are two Protestant people, in which we were two Protestant people, and you are married outside of the church, it's not necessarily, it can be recognized as a natural and not sacramental marriage. So it's not exactly the same. The main point is that if you know, the moment you know, then you have to act. So there's actually never a period of time, at least repeatedly, where I knew I believed that this is wrong and then continued to do it. So that is a delineation, especially on mortal sin. Anyways. Thank you, Jai, for sharing your time and knowledge. Thank you very much. Please read my question. Okay, Carol, powerlifting, I will go to it. Okay. How would you program grip work? You mentioned in a video that frequency is important. What percentage of 1 rep max would you recommend during the holds? Oh, that's a great question. So the main thing that I would look at would be, I know this is a very vague thing to say, but actually would be seconds in reserve. That is actually typically how I do it. So typically how I program is a load where you'd say you have 10 seconds in reserve, or 10 to 15 seconds in reserve on the week one of a particular slot, and then gradually increase. I would not do a percentage, but rather a preset load that you're going to increase. So let's say it's 5 kilograms across weeks. So this is all in relation to the slots. Now, I actually forget the exact slots that I mentioned, but it would be, let's say you are doing 3 holds for 15 seconds with a particular load, where you're saying on the last set, you have 10 seconds in reserve to hold. Then you should be able to add 5 kilograms for at least, I would say, 3 to 4 weeks without being within 3 seconds of failing. And then that's how I do it. I would always stay within that 3 to 10 second of failure on that last set. And as long as you're within that, then you can keep pushing, especially if you're doing double overhand. Now, if you are doing alternate grip on one of these slots, then it does become a little bit different. Because if you're within 3 seconds of failing on an alternate grip, that's actually really, really hard. So an alternate grip I'd do within 15 seconds as the starting point. And then I would keep it within 5 to 15 seconds as the range, as like basically that threshold. So you'd say if you get below or at 5 seconds, then either reset the whole progression or just keep the load the same. Until then, you can add load when you're within that range. Okay, one more question. I think this is pretty good. It's pretty good. Opinion on, let me see. Okay, no, this is a good one. Would you recommend so someone's asked opinion on conjugate for raw lifters. Don't do it. Would you recommend your 9-week squat program for the deadlift? Keep in mind, I have a very weird, wide, upright sumo, and I'm also very light. No, this is one that I do want to address. Of all programs that I do actually regret, it would be, not regret like in some deep way, but where I would change a lot, it actually would be the advanced squat program. So the advanced squat program, it got crazy. It got crazy. I recommended a lot of things that were, it was pushing it pretty hard. So I would not program that way now. That's probably the number one program where I'd make a lot of changes because it just pushed, especially on the like 10x3 type days. The way it went from high frequency to then lower frequency, but really high volume per session, and then just fluctuated across. It was just a little too much of change. And so I would actually just not recommend that program in general, to be honest. And that's a tough one. And the reason why is because also it just has to do with real world results. I've just seen people run it and have really good results and then on week 5, like die. and I've seen, like I know at least 3 people where I've watched it happen where they're like killing it, hitting an amazing PR. And one retired from powerlifting and he still hasn't come back. He's a friend of mine. He didn't get hurt or anything. He was just like, it just cooked him to where his like desire ended there. So the 6-week program and all the other programs are not like that where it's obviously they last because they work. But anyways, so now let's close it out. Thank you guys for the support. Thank you guys for the questions. Make sure to share this, share this live stream. Hopefully this gets, good enough views to where I can keep doing this because I absolutely will. Also, if you can support the channel, there's a $4.99 membership. Just give me a little chump change. That will definitely help these things keep going. And then also the Candito Forever program. If you ever want your form checked and some Q&As exclusive to that coming in. And most importantly, the Candito 6-week program next week, which will be in a public video. I'll talk to you guys in that next week. But yeah, if all goes well and enough people join at $4.99, I'll actually be doing this next week for members only at exactly the same time. So see you there. If you are interested, that's on the main channel. As far as where to join is on the main channel. So that's it, guys. Thank you guys for everything. Have a blessed day. And thank you guys for the really respect. Oh my goodness, Adam. You saw it. I wasn't even gonna name you. See, I protected you. But no, it's true. It's my fault. It's my fault on that advanced squad program. And thank you for the super chat. Thank you. I just joined in too. That's perfect. All right. Have a blessed day, guys. Peace out. And go to church on Sunday if you're Catholic.